After prom rejection, teen hears famous voice over loudspeaker. School erupts into chaos. The sharp bell of the high school's last period echoed through the hallways, signaling that another long day was finally over. The students who had endured the grueling grind of classes, tests, and assignments now surged into the corridors, eager to leave behind the sterile classrooms and their suffocating uniforms. It was the kind of ordinary afternoon that had played out 1,000 times before, where nothing seemed out of place, until, suddenly, it was. For most of the students at Jefferson High, this was a moment of freedom. The halls, usually buzzing with the hum of adolescent energy, were filled with clattering lockers, slamming doors, and the rising chorus of laughter as teens exchanged weekend plans and endless gossip. The excitement for prom had been palpable for weeks. Posters advertising the event adorned every wall, rosy invitations to a night of elegance, the kind of night that many of the seniors had been dreaming about since they were little. But for one student, that night was fast becoming a nightmare. Sitting alone in the back corner of the school's main courtyard, Lucas Harrison was lost in the cool breeze and the steady hum of distant chatter. The golden rays of the late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting a tranquil glow on the neatly manicured lawns and the empty bleachers where proposals had once been made. He absent-mindedly picked at a fraying thread on the hem of his jeans, too numb to appreciate the beauty of the moment. Just a few hours ago, he had stood in front of Madison Carter, the girl who had been his crush since the 8th grade. He had rehearsed his proposal for weeks, practicing his lines in front of the mirror until he had them down perfectly. His heart raced as he waited for her answer, a shaky breath caught in his chest. "Madison, will you go to prom with me?" He had chosen the perfect location, the old oak tree by the school's courtyard, the place where they had met when they were kids, where they had laughed and shared jokes and traded stories of their dream futures. It had been special to him, but it wasn't special to her. Madison had paused, looking at him with an unreadable expression, before shaking her head slowly. "I'm really sorry, Lucas. I just don't see you like that. I'm going with Noah Larson, the star quarterback, the one with the perfect hair, the big house, and a smile that made every girl in their school swoon. Madison, the popular girl, the one who had always surrounded herself with a crew of followers, had never looked Lucas's way. Not even once. The rejection had stung, deep in his chest, a sharp slap that left him dizzy and disoriented. He had smiled weakly, nodding as if the pain of her words hadn't hit him. "I understand. Thanks for being honest." But inside, Lucas was a storm. The voices in his head screamed at him, telling him he wasn't good enough, that he would never be enough. He watched her walk away, hand in hand with Noah, and felt the crushing weight of inadequacy. That was the moment it all sank in. He wasn't the one. He had always felt like an outsider at Jefferson High, never in the center of the action, never the guy everyone went to for the answers or the jokes. He was just Lucas, the guy who sat at the back of the class, the one whose face most people couldn't even name. His world had been small, and prom had been his chance to step out of the shadows. Now his world felt smaller than ever. But little did he know, this was just the beginning. As he stared at the swirling winds that blew across the courtyard, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his best friend, Nate. "Bro, don't worry about Madison. You're better off without her. Let's grab a burger or something. You good?" Lucas read the message, but the words felt like they were coming from a different world. He could almost hear Nate's voice, optimistic, always trying to fix everything, but Lucas didn't want fixing. He wanted things to make sense. He wanted to feel something other than the pit of rejection that had settled in his stomach. Lucas shoved the phone back into his pocket and glanced over at the group of girls laughing near the gymnasium entrance. Among them was Charlotte, his childhood friend, the girl who had always stood by his side, even when everyone else looked the other way. She waved at him, her bright smile lighting up her face, but he couldn't bring himself to wave back. Not now. He didn't want to seem pitiful, especially not to her. But Charlotte had always been different. She had a way of seeing through him, of understanding when something was wrong even before he said a word. She had noticed his distant mood during lunch earlier that day and had asked if he was okay. He had brushed her off then, pretending it was just the stress of the week getting to him. Now, as he walked past her and her friends, she stood up from the group and called out his name softly. "Lucas, hey, are you alright?" He didn't answer, just kept walking, the weight of her concern adding to the pressure building inside him. He couldn't explain what had happened or why he felt this way, but he knew he didn't want to talk about it. Not now, not to anyone. Not even to Charlotte. That was when it happened. The voice rang out over the loudspeaker, crisp and clear, the kind of voice that you couldn't ignore. The sound of it broke through the silence of the courtyard, halting everyone in their tracks. "Attention, Jefferson High. This is not a drill." The announcement had been startling, the words so ominous, so different from the usual daily updates. Everyone looked around at each other, confused, whispers starting to spread like wildfire. Lucas's heart began to race, but he couldn't place why. "Someone in this school has been harboring a secret," the voice continued, growing more intense. "And tonight, they'll have to face the consequences." There was a beat of silence, a long pause where nothing moved. The entire courtyard held its breath, as if every single person had the same question on their lips. Who is this mysterious speaker? What secret were they talking about? Suddenly, the voice grew louder, and in that moment, Lucas's world shifted. The words were more than just an announcement. They were a challenge. "The one who rejected Lucas Harrison's proposal, your secret is out. You're about to face a whole new reality." The world seemed to spin around him. The whispers were deafening now, the students slowly turning to look at him. Some with pity in their eyes, some with laughter. But Lucas couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The voice had just shattered whatever small shred of dignity he had left. Who had done this? His chest tightened as he looked around, feeling the sudden weight of 1,000 eyes on him. "Madison?" he whispered under his breath, knowing that his question was as absurd as it was impossible. But somehow, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. That night, everything would change. And Lucas would never be the same. The world he had known, the quiet, unremarkable existence he had clung to for so long, was about to implode. And no one, least of all him, was prepared for what came next. The stage had been set. The game had begun. The school bell rang once more, signaling the beginning of the afternoon chaos. The students, already shaken by the strange loudspeaker announcement, spilled into the hallways, their chatter now a mix of confusion and disbelief. Lucas Harrison stood still, rooted in the middle of the courtyard, his body rigid and his mind racing. His heart pounded in his chest, and his throat felt dry, like he was suffocating. The voice on the loudspeaker had completely blindsided him. The words echoed in his mind like a broken record. "The one who rejected Lucas Harrison's proposal, your secret is out. You're about to face a whole new reality." He had never been the center of attention, not like this. Not in a way that felt like a punch to the gut. His face burned, his hands trembling as he stuffed them into his pockets, desperately trying to mask a shock. But it was clear. He had no control over the situation. None at all. It didn't take long for the murmurs to begin. The whispers spread quickly through the student body, the excitement growing, fueled by an intoxicating mix of curiosity and gossip. Eyes were trained on him, and Lucas felt the weight of their stares, their judgment, the questions that hung in the air. Was it really Madison who had rejected him? The thought gnawed at him. She wasn't like this, was she? She had always been friendly, always the kind of girl to be nice to everyone. Or at least, that's what he had told himself. He had convinced himself that, deep down, Madison wasn't like the other popular kids. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe she had been playing him all along. Maybe this wasn't just about a proposal. Maybe there was something darker behind it all. Suddenly, the school's social ecosystem seemed to change. It wasn't just about prom anymore. It was about secrets, power, and hidden agendas. Madison didn't deserve this, Lucas thought bitterly. But I'm not the one who did this. I didn't ask for any of this. The chaos continued in the hallways as students gathered in groups, gossiping, their voices rising with every new rumor. But there was one person who stood out in the madness, Charlotte. She was always calm, the kind of person who could walk into a storm and not flinch. But today, as she approached Lucas, there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. She had been watching him since the announcement, her worry palpable. She had seen the pain in his eyes when Madison had rejected him earlier, but now she saw something else, something darker. "Lucas, are you okay?" Charlotte asked gently, stepping closer to him, her voice cutting through the noise. Lucas didn't answer right away. He couldn't. He had no words for what was happening. No explanation. Nothing that could make this go away. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered finally, his voice raw. "I don't even know who did it. Why would they do this to me?" Charlotte shook her head, her brow furrowing in confusion. "It doesn't make sense. Who would do this? Who even knows about your proposals?" Lucas thought about it, his mind racing. He had told a few friends, but none of them would do something like this. He hadn't even told Charlotte, not in so many words. He had kept it to himself. "I don't know," he said, feeling helpless. "But whoever it is, they're making everything worse. Madison didn't deserve this. She didn't do anything to anyone." Charlotte gave him a reassuring look, her eyes softening. "I know it's hard, but you need to find out who did this. If this gets out of hand, it's going to be bad for you and for Madison. You can't just let them get away with it." Lucas nodded, but he didn't feel confident. He had no idea where to start, no idea who was behind it or what their goal was. But one thing was for sure, things were never going to be the same again. The next few hours were a blur of frantic energy. The students had all but forgotten about their classes, their minds now consumed by the mystery of the announcement. Teachers struggled to regain control of the situation, but the students weren't having it. They were too wrapped up in the chaos, too intrigued by the drama unfolding around them. For Lucas, the day became a slow crawl toward his inevitable confrontation. He could feel the eyes of his classmates everywhere, on him in the halls, in the cafeteria, in every corner of the school. He couldn't escape the whispers. He couldn't escape the stares. And every time he saw Madison, his heart would sink a little deeper. She was surrounded by her usual crowd of friends, all of them looking over at him with that mix of curiosity and pity, but not one of them came to speak to him. It wasn't just her that made it worse. It was the others. Noah Larson *, the quarterback, the one who had stolen Madison's attention and, in turn, had become the king of the social ladder at Jefferson High. Noah had been Madison's boyfriend since sophomore year, a couple made in high school popularity heaven. He was tall, athletic, and charming, everything Lucas wasn't. Noah had everything Lucas had always wanted: confidence, popularity, a place in the social hierarchy that was untouchable. But now Noah wasn't just the jock. He was the one whose face had been plastered across the student body as the victor in this strange war that Lucas hadn't even realized he'd been fighting. Noah had heard the announcement too. He was standing across the hall from Lucas now, his presence a looming shadow. His friends gathered around him, laughing and joking, but Lucas knew that Noah's eyes were trained on him. The tension in the air was thick, and Lucas could feel the heat rising in his chest. He clenched his fists at his sides, trying to hold himself together, trying not to react. But Noah wasn't going to let that happen. "Noah, knock it off," one of his friends, Kyle, whispered loudly. "It's not his fault."
You heard what the voice said.
"He's not the one who did this." Noah smirked, crossing his arms. "Really? You expect me to believe that? Look, this is his mess, not mine. He's the one who got rejected. Not my fault his little proposal got thrown in the trash." He shot a glance at Lucas, his smile widening. "Maybe you should have taken a hint, Harrison." Every inch of Lucas's body tensed. He had always hated how Noah carried himself, like he was untouchable, like he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. And right now, with his cruel words and arrogant attitude, it was clear that Noah was enjoying every second of Lucas's discomfort. But Lucas wasn't about to let him get away with it. He wasn't going to let Noah walk all over him. "Shut up, Larson," Lucas growled, his voice low but filled with intensity. He stepped forward, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "You don't know anything." The crowd around them fell silent. The challenge was set. Noah's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, It looked like he was going to lash out. But then something unexpected happened. A voice cut through the tension, a voice that was familiar, but one Lucas never thought he'd hear today. Enough. Everyone turned to see Mr. Peters, the school principal, standing at the entrance to the cafeteria, his face stern and his posture rigid. He had clearly been watching the situation unfold, and the last thing he wanted was for his school to descend into chaos over a proposal gone wrong. "Lucas, Noah," Mr. Peters said, his tone firm but calm. "I expect both of you to be in my office now. This has gone far enough." The students slowly backed away, their eyes still glued to the scene. The conflict had escalated. Lucas and Noah were now in the principal's office, and the stakes had risen higher than either of them had imagined. The principal's office was nothing like Lucas had imagined. It wasn't some serene, authoritative space where solutions were found with calm deliberation. Instead, the room felt heavy with tension, the air thick as it reverberated with the noise of 100 different conflicting emotions. Lucas sat in a hardback chair, his knuckles white from gripping the armrests too tightly. Across from him, Noah Larson stood tall, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with the kind of rage that could only come from being challenged in front of an entire school. Mr. Peters, the principal, paced back and forth at the front of the room, speaking into his phone. His brow furrowed, and every few seconds, he'd glance at the two boys, as if waiting for them to explode. Behind the glass wall of the office, Lucas could see the school nurse standing near the doorway, waiting for any sudden movements, just in case things got out of hand. Teachers wandered past, peering in, whispering among themselves. The spectacle that had started with one loudspeaker announcement had quickly spiraled out of control, and now it was all coming to a head. "Can you believe this?" Noah muttered, turning his attention back to Lucas. He crossed his arms over his chest. "It's your fault we're in here. You couldn't take a hint. This whole thing? It's on you." Lucas clenched his teeth, but said nothing. He didn't want to give Noah the satisfaction of a reaction. Noah was wrong. This wasn't his fault. The moment had been tainted by something far more sinister than rejection. Someone had orchestrated this, dragged him into a mess that he didn't ask for. But Lucas couldn't quite figure out who or why. "Enough," Mr. Peters snapped, slamming the office door shut with a force that shook the walls. The tension seemed to grow even thicker. "You're both here because this situation has escalated well beyond anything acceptable. But this will not be solved by further fighting." He turned to Lucas, eyes narrowed. "And you, Harrison, you might want to start thinking about who would want to make your life so miserable that they'd go to this extreme to get a laugh." The words hit Lucas like a slap. His mind raced. He wanted to ask about the voice on the loudspeaker, who had spoken, why they had chosen him. But before he could respond, the door to the office swung open. A hush fell over the room as Charlotte stepped inside, her face pale and determined. Lucas could barely breathe as he saw the expression of someone who had finally made sense of something. He wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. Charlotte had been trying to help, but what was she doing here now? What was happening? "Mr. Peters," Charlotte said firmly, walking toward the front of the room, her eyes locking onto his. "I need to talk to you. Alone. Right now." Lucas looked up at Charlotte in surprise. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice strained. But Charlotte didn't answer him. Instead, she kept her focus on the principal. Mr. Peters hesitated. "Charlotte, you don't have permission. I don't care," she interjected, cutting him off. "This is bigger than all of us. You need to hear me out."
Now.
Mr. Peters glared at her, the veins in his neck visible as he gritted his teeth, but after a moment, he sighed, seeming to weigh his options. Then he nodded toward the nurse, signaling that he would take a moment to hear Charlotte out. "I've found something," Charlotte said quietly, turning to Lucas, her voice low but urgent. "I've been digging around, asking questions. I found the source of the announcement." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He leaned forward in his chair, his gaze locking onto Charlotte's, hoping, no, praying, that she had the answers he desperately needed. "It's Madison," Charlotte continued, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. "She's the one who made the call." The world seemed to stop. Everything around Lucas faded, and for a moment, he was completely still, processing the words. His mind fought against the reality Charlotte was offering. Madison had done this?
Why?
She had been the one who rejected him, but she couldn't have been the mastermind behind this twisted prank. But why? Lucas managed to croak, disbelief coloring his voice. Why would she do that? Charlotte shook her head. It's more than just a rejection. Madison's been dealing with a lot of pressure from her friends. They've been pushing her to keep up appearances, to maintain the social hierarchy. And when you rejected her, she felt cornered, like she needed to do something to regain control. I don't think she meant for it to escalate like this, but the voice on the loudspeaker? That was all her idea. Lucas's mind swirled. He had always believed that Madison was just another popular girl, someone who played the game of high school politics. But now he understood that there was far more to it than that. Madison had been hurt, pushed into a corner by forces she couldn't control. She wasn't the one who broadcasted it, though, Charlotte went on, her expression pained. She just orchestrated it. Someone else used the loudspeaker to amplify the message. At that moment, the intercom crackled. Mr. Peters had clearly been on the phone again, trying to gain control of the situation. But his voice cut through the tension like a knife. Attention, students. This is Mr. Peters. I've received confirmation that the situation regarding the proposal has been resolved. Please return to your classrooms immediately. The words barely had time to settle when a burst of laughter echoed from the hallway, followed by a chorus of excited chatter. The chaos outside hadn't died down at all. In fact, it had only intensified. The walls of the principal's office vibrated with the sound of students running, shouting, and buzzing with excitement. Enough. Mr. Peters's voice boomed again, louder this time, as he stormed back into the office. He was clearly losing control. I don't care about your so-called proposal drama, he snapped, his voice rising in frustration. The students are out of control, and this behavior will not be tolerated. We will find who is behind this, and we will deal with it accordingly. Lucas felt a pit form in his stomach. The moment had come. This wasn't just about prom. This wasn't about rejection anymore. This was about the secrets buried beneath the surface, the dark undercurrents that flowed through the school's social fabric. Mr. Peters, we need to stop this, Charlotte said firmly, her tone growing more urgent. We can't just let this slide. If we don't address this now, things are going to get worse. Someone needs to take responsibility for what's happening. The principal was quiet for a moment, his eyes flicking to the door. Outside, the sounds of laughter were growing louder. The voices from the hallway were starting to flood the office, and Lucas realized that this wasn't just an isolated incident. This had spiraled into something far bigger than any of them had anticipated. It's too late, Mr. Peters said quietly, his voice defeated. The school's already in chaos. We don't have time to figure out who's responsible anymore. We have to take action before... The door burst open before he could finish his sentence. And standing there at the threshold of the office was Madison. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. She looked completely out of place in the room full of tense, angry faces. Her posture was slumped, as if the weight of the situation had finally hit her. She had never looked so vulnerable. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The room fell into a stunned silence. Madison took a shaky step forward. She was clearly terrified of the consequences, terrified of facing the wrath of her classmates and of Lucas. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone involved. It was about how one wrong move could send the entire school into freefall. I'm sorry, she whispered, eyes downcast, guilt flooding her voice. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. I never wanted this. It was just a mistake. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Lucas stared at her, his heart pounding. There were so many things he wanted to say, but no words came. The betrayal, the confusion, the disappointment, all of it collided within him. And then, finally, he spoke, his voice rough and thick with emotion. Why didn't you just tell me, Madison? Why did you let it go this far? Madison's face crumpled, And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Lucas saw the raw truth in her eyes. "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't know what else to do. The pressure was too much. And I thought if I could just make it go away, everything would go back to normal. But it didn't." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. And as Lucas took a long, shaky breath, he realized something. This wasn't just about prom. It was about breaking free from the chains of fear, from the pressure to fit into a mold that was never meant for anyone. It was about taking ownership of the mess and starting to rebuild. But it was also about knowing when to walk away. This was the point of no return. The chaos would either settle here, or it would consume them all. The chaos that had consumed the school for days finally began to subside. The halls, which had once been filled with loud chatter and the echo of hurried footsteps, now felt oddly quiet. Students shuffled from class to class, their voices low, their expressions weary. The storm had passed, but its effects lingered in the air, palpable and heavy. The halls no longer buzzed with excitement or whispers about the loudspeaker incident. Instead, they hummed with an undercurrent of uneasy calm. For Lucas, the weight of the past week seemed to settle in his chest, heavy and unrelenting. The emotions that had flared up, anger, embarrassment, confusion, were starting to shift into something else. Something softer. Something that left him feeling raw, but also a little lighter. He couldn't explain it. He just knew that the moment he'd faced with Madison in the principal's office was the turning point. It wasn't just about the prank, or the humiliation, or even the prom rejection anymore. It was about understanding the consequences of actions, the impact of fear, and the unexpected ways in which people's lives intertwined. Now Lucas stood at his locker, staring blankly at his reflection in the glass. His thoughts swirled around like a storm, none of them making sense, none of them feeling like they belonged. He had thought this would be a simple high school experience, a proposal, a rejection, maybe some awkwardness. But instead, he had been thrown into a whirlwind of chaos, social pressure, and unexpected revelations. The realization of it all made his head spin. But it also gave him a sense of clarity.
"Hey."
A soft voice broke his reverie, and Lucas turned to see Charlotte standing there, her arms folded across her chest. She looked different now, stronger, more confident, but there was still a vulnerability in her eyes that Lucas couldn't ignore. "Hey," he replied quietly, a half-smile tugging at his lips. His heart still ached, but it didn't hurt as much as it had in the days leading up to this moment. Charlotte stepped closer, her eyes scanning the hallway. "You okay?" Lucas nodded. "I think I'm getting there. It's been a lot to process." "I know," Charlotte said with a sigh, her voice tinged with empathy. "But you did it. You stood up for yourself when it mattered. Not just in front of everyone, but to yourself too." Lucas felt the truth of her words settle deep inside him. There had been moments when he'd wanted to lash out, to yell, to fight back against the tide of chaos that had engulfed him. But in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about how he chose to move forward. Do you think people will forgive me?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte gave him a thoughtful look, her eyes softening. "I think people will understand. They'll see that you're not just some victim in this whole mess. You were part of the solution. You didn't let it define you. That's what matters." Lucas let her words wash over him, the weight in his chest easing just a little. He had been so consumed by the chaos, the confusion, and the fallout from Madison's actions that he had forgotten to look at the bigger picture. He wasn't the one who had caused the chaos. He wasn't the one who had set the fire. But he had been part of the effort to put it out. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed down the hallway, and the chatter of students picked up again. The sound of lockers opening and closing, of laughter and shouts, returned like the shifting of the tides. But this time it felt different. It didn't feel like the chaos of before. It felt like a calm after the storm. "Do you want to talk to Madison?" Charlotte asked, her voice gentle. Lucas hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the crowded hallway. He had seen Madison earlier, walking down the corridor with her friends. She had looked less confident than usual, but also quieter, more subdued. It was strange to see her in this state after everything that had happened. But there was something in the way she held herself now that made Lucas feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to understand each other. "I don't know," Lucas said after a long pause. "Maybe. But I think we both need some time." Charlotte nodded in understanding. "I get it. I just thought, maybe you should talk, just the two of you. You don't have to fix everything in one go. But maybe it's time to start healing." Lucas turned back to Charlotte, the weight of his own uncertainty weighing on him. "You're right. I'm not sure where to start." Charlotte gave him a small, reassuring smile. "You start by being honest. With yourself, with her, with everyone. And then you take it one step at a time." Lucas looked down at his hands, suddenly aware of how much had changed. The school year was coming to a close, and prom night, the night that had started all of this, was just a few days away. But he wasn't the same person he had been when it all started. He had learned something invaluable over the course of the past week: the importance of standing up for what mattered, the power of choosing his own path, and the necessity of letting go of things he couldn't control. And most importantly, he had learned that forgiveness wasn't just about the other person, it was about him, too. "Thanks, Charlotte," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "For everything. For not giving up on me." Charlotte shrugged modestly, but there was a light in her eyes. "I'm just doing what anyone would do for a friend." The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. The hallway quickly began to clear, students filtering back to their classrooms. The noise and bustle of the school were normal again. But in the midst of the usual chaos, there was a sense of resolution that lingered, a promise that things would get better. Lucas stood there for a moment, watching the students rush past him, feeling a strange sense of calm settle in his chest. His story wasn't over yet. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had control over the direction it was headed. He had faced the storm, and now, he was ready for the next chapter. As he walked toward his next class, his mind drifted toward Madison again. She was part of this story too, and he knew that there would come a time when they would need to talk. They both had to face their mistakes. But it wouldn't happen today. Maybe not even tomorrow. But it would happen when the time was right. For now, Lucas was content to move forward, one step at a time. And as he reached the door to his classroom, he glanced back once more at the hallway, filled with students and the bustle of life, and finally let go of the past.